Hello everyone, this is Jotto, and welcome to my October meta report. This is my, time of the month where I just decide to do tier lists, because tier lists, and other people don't really do them. So anyway, so the metagame hasn't changed a lot since the last tier list I did. However, it has developed, and we're going to get a major rebalance on Wednesday. So I figured, well, might as well do this video now to kind of compare and contrast on how the meta developed over the last month, since there were some very minor changes to Disarm, Dust Titan, and a rather large one to Bloodseeker Mutant. But that's the only changes to the game, and also Burke's Hero Power got buffed. Those are the only changes to the game that happened since my last meta report. So yeah, now something else about this one, the list is a lot longer. The reason for this is because we've been in this meta for 2 months now, which means a lot more archetypes have been discovered, and as a result have landed themselves on various parts of the list, whereas last time it was a bit more vague. So, on to Tier 1. Quick disclaimer before I start. Tier 1 is the best deck, or the 2 best decks if they're very close. Tier 2 is very good decks that you would expect to see play on ladder. And Tier 3 is okay decks that can be played, and Tier 4 is decks you just shouldn't play. So yeah, those are the 4 tiers, so the majority of decks will be between Tier 2 and 3, with a few outliers in Tier 1 and Tier 4. So, first things first, Tier 1 comprises of 2 decks for once. Advanced Neva Mono Color Advanced Neva Mono Green, and Mono Red Advanced Zash Midrange variants. So, first things first, Advanced Neva and Advanced Zash. Why are they both at Tier 1? Well, Advanced Zash was there before, but Advanced Neva has leaped up to the top since, well, people discovered the builds that actually work with Advanced Neva to beat Advanced Zash. Advanced Neva is actually favored against Advanced Zash because of Ancient Treant nowadays. And it's not that favored, it's very close, but it is slightly favored. But the reason why they're equal is because while Advanced Neva appears to be stronger, Advanced Zash has a more reliable win rate against outlying rogue decks that you don't see very often. And by rogue decks, I mean things that people just build and play on ladder because they want to, like their decks. So Advanced Neva has some issues against some of the aggro-centric rogue archetypes, like Implant variations, whereas Advanced Zash doesn't have these issues, which means that while the deck itself is slightly less powerful, from a ladder perspective, they're about even. So, first place, at least at the beginning of the season, switches between them, and like Advanced Neva came first and second last season, but then in top 10 now it's about 3 or 4 Advanced Neva, and then 3 or 4 Advanced Zash. It's about balanced. So people have adapted this. Random comment, by the way, the power of Phoenix has really gone down in this metagame. It's not very good against green anymore because of Fae of Charm and Ancient Treant, and also the playstyles have changed with Word of Vigor. So Phoenix has been pared down a lot, to the point where a lot of mono red variants have actually cut Phoenix because it just isn't good against green, whereas if you want to be good against green you have to be a little bit more aggressive. So that's Tier 1, pretty self-explanatory. Tier 2, oh this is a long list. I'll get the 2 obvious ones out of the way first. Advanced Neva and Advanced Zash 2 color decks. So yeah, I've said this before, adding a second color to Advanced Zash makes it weaker. Same goes for Advanced Neva. The reason with Advanced Neva is actually the same as Advanced Zash, the Word of cards. Word of Vigor is a ludicrously powerful pump spell on 3 different creatures if you're playing mono green, or 2 different creatures earlier in the game, whereas if you're playing 2 color, you can't do that early in the game for 2 creatures or late in the game for 3. It also drops your consistency a bit in terms of shrines, and just lowers the consistency in general, which means that you lose a few more games. Now, with Advanced Zash, the last Asperia, actually no Advanced Zash decks ended up in top 4. Top 4 was 2 Wisdom Dominion decks, 2 Advanced Neva decks, and I think part of the reason for that was that all the people that brought red were playing blue-red, and they actually lost a lot of games because they didn't have those 3 damage Wardifiers and that consistency. They had a couple shrine stumbles, and as a result had a few issues. So I would highly recommend playing the mono variants over the 2 color variants. So yeah, Tier 2, 2 color variants of Tier 1 decks, basically. Moving on, blue-red variants. Now, by blue-red variants, I mean 2. There's basic Darius, Blue, which tends to be a little bit more aggressive, although can just go either way. And then there's Elreich Blue. Now, Elreich Blue has been... Okay, I did not know that zoomed in. Anyway, Elreich Blue basically uses Elreich with Phoenixes to make them 3/3s and things like that, and just uses them for tempo boosts. Now, last time I actually had tier list talked a bit about this, and I said that Kindle in particular prefers basic Darius over Elreich, but honestly I think it's up in the air. I think Elreich is a powerful hero, and he does fit into the archetype, but basic Darius has a bit more flexibility to him. So that's blue-red variants. Next we got Wisdom Dominion. So there's two forms Wisdom Dominion. There's basic Darius and advanced Despina. Basic Darius has been seeing a bit more play recently because Despina isn't fantastic in a lot of situations. It's not very good against green because all of their creatures are pretty bad if they're not swarming, and it's not very good against red with the exception of Phoenix, but the game's probably locked down by that point. It can get Ramgath though, which is relevant. So Wisdom Dominion stays here. Now, weirdly enough, it actually got weaker over time because advanced Neva players kind of figured out how to play the deck, because the deck is not easy, and the Zash players started relying less on Phoenix, which makes Helm worse. On top of that, they're all playing like 3 artifact removal now, so Helm is worse against red. So it dropped in general. However, they got Blood-Seeking Mutant, which is an amazing card, and it's pretty much the only way they can beat Neva decks right now. It's if you get multiple, and even then it doesn't always work, which means that the deck got a buff, but it stayed the same in power level, which is weird, but it's kind of true. So Wisdom Dominion kind of goes in the tier 2 slot again. Its win at Asperia did put it up a little bit, but it kind of stabilized back down again. It's just at tier 2. Next, we've got a deck that actually increased in tiers, Hermeleon Green. Now, Hermeleon Green is the deck that uses a whole bunch of Ancient Treants and Fae of Charms and just keeps reanimating them with Instill Life and using the hero power, Tireless March, to get multiple activations, meaning that basically nothing can block you. Because if you steal something Fae of Charm, it's exhausted on the second combat phase, so it can't block, and the Ancient Treant buff doesn't expire until your next turn, so you just lock down his entire board and just keep attacking him. It's an aggro deck, but it plays like a beatdown deck. It plays almost like a mid-range druid deck from Hearthstone, where it's not really an aggro deck, but you just play big things and smash face with it. And it's actually quite powerful. The reason it's a tier 2 deck is because while it is good against red because of all the Ancient Treants, it's really bad against Neva. It has some serious issues against Neva because it's on the same game plan, which is 1-for-1ing basically, and use Instill Life to gain card advantage. But the longer the game goes, the worse it gets for the Hermeleon deck, because while his card quality is higher with things like Cavalry Field Captain, unfortunately he doesn't have Nienna and can't interact with Nienna in any way, and also has issues with Reverence, just building up massive amounts of creatures. Fae of Charm is kind of the saving grace in that matchup, but the problem is both players have it, and it gets a bit awkward. So Hermeleon, tier 2 deck, matchups have increased a little bit with red becoming more popular again, and a lot of the tier 2 decks being red-centric. So Hermeleon has gone up a tier. Alright, on to Elreich Implants. Now, Elreich Implants was the deck that Clone was playing last season, and he kind of stopped by the end of last season, but he was playing a lot of it. And so the deck focuses on putting a bunch of implants on something, and then copying the implanted creature with Elreich giving you like an 8-9 or something ridiculous, and then just keep hitting face. It's a pure aggro deck. It's tier 2, it has some issues. The Elreich twin tokens die to Zash really easily, just from random word-of-fires. And also on top of that, it's really vulnerable to things like Bounce and Unicorn and Neva. So it's basically a deck that is favored against everything that isn't tier 1, which means that it can't go to tier 1, even though it has advantageous matchups pretty much everywhere else. In fact, I think it's on the verge of going down to tier 3 in its current state. Alright, on to Order Dominion Midrange. Now, this is a new addition. Order Dominion Control came and went and kind of died off. That was a tier 4 deck, if I recall correctly on my last list, maybe tier 3. But this version is very different. This is something that I will credit Clone with creating. He basically took an Order Dominion control deck, took out a lot of the control cards, and put in the Cavalry Field Captains. He put in the Knight with the 2/4 Knight that I can never remember the name of. Let me go find this. He put in Cavalry Field Captains, he put in Knight Escorts, that's it, and just focused on having a big board of really sticky creatures that are a pain in the neck to remove, and as a result, it worked. It actually propelled the deck upwards, and I would say that it is one of the few decks you can actually play reliably on ladder and do reasonably well with. Now, it does have about 40% win rate against Neva, which is fairly impressive, and against Zash, it's generally very, very difficult for him to get through your Knight Escorts and things like that, since they don't die to Fireball. So the deck itself is very interesting. I think that it's reasonably powerful, and if Order gets any buffs, I think it'd be a deck to watch in the future. Okay, on to Burning Rage. Burning Rage has been a tier 2 deck for a really long time, to be honest. It's never been tier 1. It's been tier 2 for months at this point. Nothing has changed from the last time I talked about this deck. There haven't been any changes in the deck for about 2 months, where we had the Despina buff and the what's it called, the vampirism nerf. So yeah, basic Despina Burning Rage is about the same as it always has been. It does have some issues against Advanced Neva and Advanced Zash, but it's good against everything else, so it's a tier 2 deck by default. Although I think it's a little bit more resilient in some situations and worse in others than the Auric Implants deck we talked about a little bit earlier. Burning Rage is very good against control, but it has some issues against aggro and things like that, so it has dropped a little bit, but I still think that there's enough strange decks on the ladder, like Soldiers and things like that, that you can actually play decently well with it, although again, like Implants, but it's on the verge of dropping to tier 3. Alright, on to red aggro variants. Now, last time I used Advanced Zash as the example here. I'm going to use Burke this time, because Burke has a cooldown reduction on his hero power, making it 3. Now, mono red aggro is a tier 2 deck that no one ever sees. Why? Because Advanced Zash upgraded the deck. I actually mentioned this last month as well. The deck itself isn't bad. The thing is that there's a strictly better version that's a tier 1 deck. So you may as well just play the Advanced Zash variants and go for a more mid-rangey style, and that would just be better than going for a Burke or basic Zash style with pure aggro. So that's basically why you never see a pure aggro deck ever, is because Advanced Zash variants are just better. But the deck itself isn't bad. If you don't have Advanced Zash, then you can try out something like this and just go full aggro. And it actually shows that, I mean, we've had people like Bosch in Conquest format just play 3 Rage decks. Because all 3 heroes are reasonably playable, it just so happens that one of them is ludicrously powerful. Alright, 2 more for tier 2. We've got, as I said, this list is a lot longer than the previous one. Next, we've got Corruption Kayano. This was a deck that I've actually done a deck tech on before. But it was a Kayano deck that ran Library Guards and Ancient Wisdom for a splash in blue, but mostly ran corruption threats like Bedeviled Fiend and Harpy, and was quite good in that regard. It took a bit of a drop against Wisdom Dominion, but now it's back up a bit. There's a lot more red right now, so it's actually decent, but it's really bad against Advanced Neva, and that's also gone up. So it's one of those decks that just, again, all the ones towards the bottom of tier 2 are kind of on the verge of dropping to tier 3, and this is another one of those where it's on the borderline, and if I had 0.5 in my tier list, this would probably be in tier 2.5. But the deck itself is reasonably playable, and we'll have to see how Kayano does with the 20 life change and a whole bunch of different buffs and nerfs to various cards, so I might revisit this deck at some point. Next, we've got a deck named by Fuzz and built by Rajan, Hazy Blue. So Hazy Blue was a deck that Rajan played a decent amount of. It was Order, Wisdom, midrange with Elric, and well, it was more of an aggro deck than midrange. It was basically, yeah, it is more of an aggro deck than midrange. Basically an Order aggro deck with Elric that uses Cavalry Field Captain buffs along with Elric illusions to make them absolutely huge and have 4 speed. And along with that, you have things like Path for late game, making it basically an aggro deck with a sustainable mid to late game, which is an interesting concept. The problem is that it's bad against, you guessed it, green and red. Yep, and that's why it's at the bottom of tier 2, because it's bad against the 2 tier 1 decks, even though the deck itself isn't bad. Its 2 bad matchups happen to be green and blue, because of Unicorn and high-speed creatures dealing with the illusions, and on the flip side of things, you've got all the Fire Blasts just completely destroy you. So, we've got Hazy Blue at the bottom of Tier 2. Now, moving on to Tier 3. This is where the OK decks that you probably won't see that much on ladder, but you'll occasionally run into them, reside. First things first, we've got Reflector decks. Advanced Darius Reflector decks. Now, Advanced Darius Reflector is basically Freeze Mage. For anyone who's seen me play this on stream, always in friendlies, I played against this a few times on Ranked recently. That was amusing. But the deck just stalls the board and removes everything, stalls the board, uses Reflectors to draw, and just draws for Dragonfires, and then combo kills you in 2 turns with Reflectors and Dragonfires, or Fireball, then Dragonfire, instant speed. So that's basically the Reflector deck. It's not very good because it's bad against Unicorn, and against Red you don't have enough time to set up. And on top of that, it's a bit clunky, so it does drift down to Tier 3. I'm going to close the window since we seem to have someone doing some gardening outside. Yep, that's actually as far as I can get it, so we'll just have to deal with the background sound. So yeah, Reflector decks are a bit clunky, which is why they drop down a tier below some of the other decks that have the 2 Tier 1 decks as a bad matchup. Next, we actually have, again, not switching, Lightning Zombies. Lightning Zombies is a Tier 3 deck. Now, this is something I did a deck tech on yesterday. So if you want to go check that out, I'll put any of the decks I mention, I'll put the deck tech links in the description. So there'll be a long list of deck techs that I've done for various different decks if you're interested. Lightning Zombies is a Tier 3 deck. The reason for this is because it is hopeless against Neva. It's good against Zash, but it's also not very good against some of the other decks. Like, it's not very good against Order and things like that. It's just not, it's not a very good deck. It's okay, but it's not a massively competitive deck, and I think with a bit more tweaking and maybe some buffs to Corruption, I think it could be a Tier 2 deck, but in its current state, I would put it at high Tier 3. Now, on to Corruption Control variants. There are 2 Corruption Control variants. Again, sticking with Advanced Darius. Advanced Darius is the king of Tier 3, I think is what we discovered today. So, Corruption Wisdom, strangely enough, I actually think it's a Tier 3 deck, but Senelion got it to rank 1 for a day, and then kept playing and it dropped massively. But it ran things like Ziara, and Darius Stormrun's ability allows you to do 2 AoE damage, and it was actually a half-decent deck. You've got Dust Titan now, that's a good addition to the deck in general, but the deck itself just isn't strong enough against any of the Tier 2 or Tier 1 decks. That's why it falls below here. And then the other one is Corruption Dominion. Now, Corruption Dominion decks generally run either Advanced Nefaris or Coronis, because you need, basically your only form of draw power is Sanctum of the Void. So, not Sanctum, Stronghold Metropolis. So, Coronis allows you to draw cards, and Nefaris allows you to get card advantage through its hero power. Now, the problem with Dominion Corruption is you don't have any viable form of ramp, and you need a lot of mana to get your powerhouse cards, like Necromantic Cult, running. You do have Bloodseeker Mutant now, which is very helpful with this kind of deck, and can actually help you get some weakness counters on things to trigger your Necromantic Cult. So basically the weakness counter engine now between those two. But you need a lot of mana to make it work, and as a result I've even seen people running basic Despina with this kind of deck. And Corruption Dominion is one of those decks that everyone tries to get working, and I actually play against it every so often, it just never wins. And I've played quite a few games with Corruption Dominion. I love the style, but it's just never good enough, and as a result it falls quite low on the list. Next we've got the beloved Wisdom Tempo. For me, I love Wisdom Tempo. Again, deck tech in the description. Haven't done an update on this in a while though, but I don't know. We'll see where Wisdom Tempo goes. I think it's one of those decks that will eventually come back in the distant future. It is a very, very budget deck, so if you're new to the game, it is one of the best decks to get into first, because it can actually win games, and you can build it in about 4 days. And no, I'm not joking. I have done this on my alt account. I have built Tempo Wisdom in 4 days from scratch. And now with Spectral Aurite, you don't even need the lamps as much. Spectral Aurite being a 3/3 is almost as good as Lamp now with all the artifact removal running around, which means that I think the deck is super cheap right now. So if you're looking for a reasonably okay deck to build from starters than just try Temple Wisdom. But unfortunately, the deck has got worse over time. I think with Advanced Neva being nerfed and Red being nerfed, I'm assuming Advanced Neva is going to be nerfed, and I know Red's going to be nerfed because they've announced it. Then Temple Wisdom should go up a little bit, and we'll have to see what kind of blue builds have to come out of it. But for now, it's a tier 3 deck. It's gone down over time, unfortunately. Next, Reanimator decks. First things first, Corruption-based Reanimator with Advanced Nepharos. The 25 life makes this worse, and the reason for that is because Succubus is no longer a fast clock. Before, it only took 7 Succubus triggers and attacks to kill someone, whereas now it takes an entire extra 2. Because the way the maths works out is you go from 21, 24, 25 is just above, and it's really awkward. So instead of 7, you need 9, and 9 is way too slow. So you need 9 Succubus triggers to kill someone, and that's really slow. The difference between 7 and 9 is basically 4 turns. Because you play one, like you can play one and then you can't sacrifice them anymore with Stronghold Metropolis and reanimate them. So you basically only get one every 4 turns. On top of that, you can't just kill someone with triggers anymore because you don't have 4 Succubus plus 4 Reanimate or Occultism. So you just have to rely on Occultism and rely on them not dying on your opponent's turn with all the red around. It's awkward. On top of that, you lose a lot of life with the hero power, so the Succubus life gain doesn't help as much against red. It's just a bad spot right now. So yeah, Reanimator is not really in a good spot currently. Now, next, we've got Reanimator Kayano, also known as 5... Is it 5 color? Order Dominion... Yeah, Order Dominion, Wisdom, Nature, Corruption. Yeah, 5 color. So we've got this 5 color Reanimator deck that sometimes plays Obelisk, sometimes just runs Airship Explorer and Word of Knowledge to discard Antriel to reanimate it in some matchups, and runs Overwhelming Forces. Funnily enough, I actually played against this deck for the first time in a very long time in my Lightning Zombies deck tech. That was the game, and I got crushed by Overwhelming Forces, because, yeah, it was a bit awkward, because it's the only deck that runs Overwhelming Forces currently, since Dominion Neva has kind of died off. But, Kayano, in general, he's not very good currently. I think Corruption Kayano is possible, but I think that Reanimated Kayano just isn't very good at all. It's always been the worst version of Kayano, I felt, but in this case it is just too clunky for the current metagame, so it drops down to tier 3. Okay, on to Wisdom Order mid-range variants. Now, I mentioned Hazy Blue earlier, but that's more of an aggro deck, so I don't really have a hero that fits in this. I guess just go basic Darius. Wisdom Order mid-range usually runs things like Guardian and things like that, and it's just not very good right now. You don't have any finishers, you have Antriel, I guess, but you don't have that many finishers, and you have some issues with the support line creatures, which is a really big deal. And you've got things like Phoenix, you have Pacify for Phoenix, but then you have to hold up 2 mana for the whole game, and it just causes some issues. So the deck has just always been too clunky, and if you want to see why it's too clunky, play Trials. If you go Wisdom, Order, and Trials, always looks better than it actually is, so you can draft an amazing deck and then play it and it does terribly. And it's, weirdly enough, one of the parallels between Trials and Constructed is how well Order, Wisdom, mid-range variants do. It's a long tier list. Anyway, on to Angels. Angels, oh, how the mighty have fallen. So, it's been 2 months since Angels got their nerfs. And honestly, it's been dreadful. Guardian doesn't even stop nature anymore. They have Elf Commander and Ancient Treant. And with Word of Vigor, you've got Ancient Treants and Haldir Riders attacking for 4 or 5 each. So you don't even need to... And Guardian can't be sacrificed to kill 1 creature or 2 creatures anymore, so it just never triggers. Antriel's not very good because you just block it with 1 HP creatures. None of the Angels are good, and Triangelic is too slow to actually win. So it loses to Neva every time. And against Zash, they quite literally just kill every Angel you play. They've got Disciple of Zash sometimes, they've got the Hero Power, Fire Blast, and the games go long. Even Antriel dies now, just to a Fireball Hero Power. You can go Fire Blast, Hero Power, kill 2, you can kill Protector, Guardian, and Antriel with just that. It's no longer good for Advanced Alexa against Rage, because Zash is just so good against Angels. It lets you hit those higher numbers, and if they have Disciple as Zashes, you're just screwed. On top of that, those games go really long, which means you can actually just have 4 resources and Word of Fire and just take out all the Angels like that. So Angels really has dropped a lot. On to Coronis Implants. Now, Coronis Implants is basically just a worse version of Elric Implants, where instead of playing the implants and then getting a massive token, you play your token to put implants on it. And then you get Lifebound from the Soul Raven, which is good in theory, but in practice it's very slow. And as a result, it's a tempo deck, but it doesn't really support itself very well. Whereas Elric helps propel your tempo forward, Coronis actually loses a bit of tempo when you use the hero power. So it just isn't as good as Elric, so that's why it falls down to tier 3. Next we have something near and dear to my heart, Shamans. Shamans is the most hilarious deck in the game to play, because you can combo kill people from 50, but it's just not very good. It's okay, I think that with a bit of work and a lot of practice you could probably get it to almost tier 2, but it's just not very good. Maybe if the meta is very slow. It's an absolute control killer, but there aren't any very good control decks right now, so it just doesn't fit, and that's why Shamans kind of drops down a little bit. Next, last deck in tier 3, Mono Soldiers. Soldiers in 2-color can actually be possible. I don't have it on the tier list because it kind of fits in a couple of other archetypes. Like I've seen Order Neva, which fits into Advanced Neva 2-color. In tier 2, and that's just running soldiers with Advanced Neva to fill up your hand again later on and keep the momentum going. I've seen some other 2-color decks with Order, with Blue, but that's more like Hazy Blue type stuff. Instead of running Elric, you run Alexa, things like that. So it's not really an archetype, the 2-color thing, it's just kind of random decks you don't really see. They're more rogue decks, and Mono Soldiers itself is just bad. It's not very good against Advanced Neva. You need something else to help you out there, like a green set of tricks or just a God Draw. And against Advanced Zash, you just get laughed at with Fire Blast and Hero Power. So Mono Soldiers just isn't very good. It's possible, but it's not very good. On to Tier 4, the decks you should probably never play. First things first, Chalice. I guess I go with the basic Darius here. Chalice is just really bad right now. It's so slow, so it loses to every aggro and mid-range deck, and on top of that, you put everything into one Chalice, and then you lose to Unicorn. So, yeah, Chalice is awful in its current state, which I'm kind of happy about, and I think they said they were going to change it to be less cancerous. I don't want Chalice to be good ever, so I'm glad it isn't right now, because it's absolutely miserable to play against Chalice. On to Mono Dominion Implants. I guess I'll bring up Coronis for this. So the mono colors, actually the last 3 decks in this list are monocolor. So there's no reason to run Mono Dominion Implants. I have played against it a few times. They're not starter decks. I have actually played against fully fledged implant decks a few times, and honestly it's just better to splash blue and get either Elric or Protectors and Library Guards, things like that. So Mono Dominion just doesn't have a use right now. Then we've got Mono Corruption, Demons and Zombies. Both of them are just bad. Zombies can't end the game right now. They don't have any finishers. That's why Lightning Zombies actually splashes the Darius hero power just to be able to end the game. And Enoch Demons just isn't very good. Dark Portal is so vulnerable, and if you play Dark Portal you die to red and it just gets unicorned, and then you're playing a very mediocre Corruption deck without Dark Portal against Neba, and so it just can't win against Artifact Removal or anything aggressive. So Demons just isn't very good. Now, the last deck here is Fast and Furious, also known as Elves. Now, I know that Advanced Neva runs a ridiculous amount of Elves, but let's be honest, it only runs a ridiculous amount of Elves, so you can draw them with Nienna, and that and pretty much every green creature is an Elf. However, actual Elves, like running the like Elf Commander Aggro with all the Elf Shrines, and you run the Death Traps, basically Fast and Furious, which was actually a half-decent deck at some point, but the 5 life increase basically killed the deck. It can't win anymore. So, yeah, it was always a tier 2, maybe tier 3 deck, 'cause it just died to Fire Blast, but now it can't even win the game. So yeah, I would not recommend playing Elves, although I will say that after the patch, Basic Neva may actually be a tier 2 deck. I know just life change from 25 to 20, and it jumps 2 tiers. But that is how much of a big deal that life change is to a deck like Basic Neva, because you just can't win with the 25 life. It's an extra haste turn, and you don't have time for that, because that's an extra 3 turns, and then you're just dead. So anyway, that's my entire tier list. Those were 30 minutes of going through tier lists. As I said, this tier list is a lot more developed than the previous one because the metagame hasn't changed much, it's just developed. So we got a lot more optimized lists and a lot more lists showing up. I think that if we had this meta for like another month, the list would probably narrow down a bit, and then we'd discover what was actually good and what's just sort of an outlying deck. But we're getting a major balance change on Wednesday, so that's not going to happen. But yeah, now, if you want to see any of the decks that I've personally gone over, as I said, I'll put them in the description. As far as I know, that would be, what? Wisdom Dominion's really out of date. So I think I'll just do anyone for this balance patch, and anything that hasn't really been edited. So, Wisdom Tempo, Kayano, Advanced Neva. I think I've got Advanced Neva 2-color and Advanced Neva Mono. The Advanced Neva Mono is actually in my ladder report. So yeah, I'll link that in the description. You can go check it out. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback or have any suggestions for video topics, put it in the comment section below. But as for now, this has been Jotto, signing off.